Hello. Guess what? It's week 2. And this is your weekly Watch Me, obviously. And I will do what I normally do. We'll take care of some housekeeping things. And then I'll talk about the chapters that are to be studied this week. There are only 3, so it's a shorter amount of reading to do this week. I do it this way because it's very important to get those first 4 chapters and the study, the issues of the studying of the field. And I'm not quite sure everybody read that before they did things like answer forum questions. And so, yes, some of you all lost some points in some of the forum questions. So, but anyway, let's talk first about the housekeeping things, as I call them. They're the things before the material. Here's the first thing. If I see it, there is no S on your major. There is no S on your courses. You should not be saying communications. Okay? The reason is that when you put that S on there, what you get is you get it tied only to the mass media field. We have a communications office on campus, and you know what it is? It's the News Bureau. All right? Do not sell yourself as a communications major because you tie yourself only to things like news sources and broadcasting and those kinds of things. And also, the cellular phone industry has usurped the use of that word. So just say you're a communication major. All right? That lets people know that you have the communication skills, no S in there, communication skills that are necessary to be a good worker, person that's a team member, etc. Because those are the courses that you'll be studying in this major. No S. Some of you all will see that in your forum posts where I say, don't put an S on communication. Another thing, while I'm reading the forum posts, that I want you to pay attention to is let's use proper grammar. A lot of you all, and you know this is wrong, you've known it since elementary school or junior high school, and I realize some of you all have been out for a while, but you would have known it even better than the younger folks do. You don't say me and so, me and my wife, me and my friend, me and my boss, right? You know that. You've known that rule forever. Don't write with improper grammar. You're going to be communication majors. You're going to be communication graduates. So speak with proper grammar. And you all know the rule about that. You never come first, right? And you reverse the order. And if me fits, you use me. If I fits, you use I. If you said, me and my wife went to the store, right? Because you wouldn't say my wife and me went to the store. Right? My wife and I went to the store. So that's the rule on that. So let's get our grammar set also. I will be marking grammar in the papers you turn into me. I won't mark grammar in the tests, but I will mark grammar on your paper. So, and again, we'll talk more about that. Actually, I think I'm going to do a separate little watch me for towards the end of the week about the papers that are due next week. They're not due this week. All right. Let's talk about the forum posts for a few minutes. In the morning when I put it up, all right, and this week there was some confusion, and I let some people make up the one that they missed because, you know, this is the first week you're trying to get things together. They go up usually around 6:45, 7 o'clock, sometimes depends on what time I get in, which is usually between 6:45 and 7. And then I leave that last one up for maybe 45 minutes to an hour after I put it up there. All right. On Tuesday, Thursday, it's going to go down before 8 because I go to class at 8. All right. This past week, I gave it a little bit longer just to get you all used to doing that. But it's going to come down. All right. So when that new one goes up, The old one's going to come down shortly thereafter, and you can't go back to answer it. Now, I am going to do a couple of things with questionings where I'll let you go back and look at what you said in the earlier one, and I'll leave that up. But once I've graded it, it's not staying. Okay, at that cutoff time, I will do the grading and then reopen it so you can look at it. And also a smart move is to save a copy of what you posted, because oftentimes test questions will be similar to some of the forum questions, some even identical. So save what you put in the forum post, all right? Because that will be more helpful to you when you take the test. I did have a little issue that I want to point out, that when you see a theorist's name, all right, at the chapter, they did not write that chapter. Griffin, Ledbetter, and Sparks wrote the book, all right? Where you see that name of the theorist, they're just telling you who the theory is attached to. They tell you that in the introduction, but who reads an introduction to a textbook? I know. So anyway, just keep that in mind. So if you wanted to use a quote or something, you wouldn't say according to whoever that theorist was at the beginning of the chapter, where they're telling you who the theorist is that's tied most commonly to that theory. You would say according to Griffin, Ledbetter, and Sparks. All right, and then you could say that theorist said. All right, and then you cite it in the textbook, not unless you go to the actual article or articles. Most of those people have tons of articles, so you're easier just to use the textbook material and cite it that way. Let me see here. One other thing about forum posts. The later you post, the less responses you will get to your post. So if you're saying, well, why didn't anybody respond to me? And you're posting at 4 in the morning, and I realize that sometimes some of you with your jobs and that kind of thing, that's what you have to do. But a couple of you asked me, how come nobody responded to me? Well, because I take it down. So it's a case of the earlier you respond, the more likely you will be to get responses to your posting. Also, the more clear you are in your posting. There were some that even I scratched. My head does itch, but I even scratched my head about what you were saying. I had to read it a couple of times, and I did note that a few that were like that, or a couple that were like that, I guess, in the last couple posts, were that nobody responded to you. Maybe they didn't understand what you were saying. So be clear in what you're saying. Y'all are doing great on these. I do want to point that out. One second. I'll be posting the grades on number 3 a little later today. And of course, 4 doesn't come down until Monday morning, so you won't see those until after that. I think that was it. You know, what exactly are you saying here? So, Labor Day week, and I'll remind you of this. I'm going to do the forum posts Tuesday to Friday again. All right. And the reason is because Monday's Labor Day. And yeah, some of y'all will get online and look, and some of y'all may use that as a catch-up day, but it is a day off for you. The university is closed, so I'll do that. I'll do Tuesday to Friday again, so you don't have to do it on Monday. So, and I'll remind you that some of you all, it's very interesting. Some of you all have been emailing me and asking me questions that are either in the materials or that I did in a Watch Me. And I realize you're not going to remember every single little thing I said, but it's like, okay, I've said this in 3 places and you're asking me. It's like, right, Ms. Poorman and I were talking about that the other day. So I know you're in 1200, Com 1200 with her. She's one of my close friends. So think that's all I have in the housekeeping things. Actually, no, it's not. You have a test coming up this week. I will post a test on Thursday around noon. You will have until Sunday at 5 to turn it in. All right. There'll be 20 questions. They'll be similar to those forum post questions where I ask you to take a theory or a theoretical premise or a part of a theory and apply it to a real world situation. It's as simple as that. All right. It's going to be a paragraph. I'm talking 5, 6, 7 sentences. I am not talking a one-liner or a two-liner. I'm talking about a discussion. So they're not essays, but they are paragraphs. All right. There are 20 of them. They're worth 5 points apiece. And as I said, they're very similar to the forum post questions you've been asked. And once again, yes, you have something due next Wednesday, which will be the first article analysis. I will do a separate little watch me later this week and post it in the section about the article analysis up above where I tell you how to find an article. And you are welcome to use the sample articles that I've posted. Those are from other classes, and I just put them there, and so you can see what a scholarly journal article looks like. Okay, now I'm done with the housekeeping things. Let's talk about chapters 8, 9, and 10. Yeah, we are going to talk about 10, but 8, 9, and 10 first. We're still in the interpersonal communication area. And what we're talking about here is more the relationship development. All right. How do we take, we're not establishing the relationships in these 3 theories like we were in the earlier ones. We're talking, the start of a relationship, interpersonal relationship. We're talking about developing that relationship. And these can be friendships, they can be romances, they can be family, they can be work, any number of places where you will have relationships with other people. There is see, there's a grammar problem for me. There are, in fact, one of the posts I read had, that's another thing, number agreement. It's like, if it's going to be plural, it's not is. If it's going to be plural, it's going to be are. Okay, or I seen. I saw that in a couple of posts. No, I seen. Okay, the 2 approaches are experiential. All right, the experience of it. It's also called the phenomenological approach, but what it means is that it's a part of your experience. How do you experience is the experiential end of relationship development. And then the second approach, all right, that most of you all will go, oh no, I don't do that in my relationships, but we do, all right. Rewards and benefits, all right. Cost benefit analysis, all right, is what is most commonly referred to. A lot of people don't like that approach, but it's how relationships actually develop, and they take the business model and apply it to relationships, and those approaches to theories of relationship development. Law of supply and demand, courting a buyer, laissez-faire rules, let the buyer beware, expert advice, and investors and traders. So you'll read that section in the introduction to this area that comes just before chapter 8, so make sure that you do. But those are the 2 main approaches, and so the 3 theories that he picks are ones that are fascinating, and some of y'all have already mentioned these. 1 second, someone's at my door on a Sunday morning. Weird. Someone forgot their key. So how did you get in the door? Oops, I think that's my problem. I think I unlocked it. Chapter 8, all right. This is Altman and Taylor's approach to relationship development, and it's an easy one. It's called the social penetration theory. And when we talk about the social penetration theory, what we're talking about is starting at a relationship level that has no depth to it, and you build into one that has depth to it. I forgot to open my book. Now I'm set. That's what happens when you come in early in the morning on a Sunday and go, okay, let me get this done. So, social penetration is simply defined as developing deeper intimacy with another person, and it's done through self-disclosure. All right, that's the bottom line. So it's a very simple theory. But if you look at the top, if you have your book open, you look at the top of page 98, you'll see it's the idea of an onion. All of are familiar with it. An onion has many layers. All right, and you start at the outside and you work your way into the middle. Is the idea of social penetration. And each layer of that onion is a different aspect of a person's personality and the depth of their personality. So you go from almost not knowing anything into closeness. And the only way you can do that is through dialogue. Now, a lot of y'all go, oh, I hate the small talk. All right. No, you don't hate the small talk. That's the only way you can get to the depth, folks. You have to start with small talk, whether you like it or not. All right. That's the process of developing the relationship, getting to know the person. And self-disclosure is just defined as the voluntary sharing of personal history, preferences, attitudes, feelings, values, beliefs, secrets, etc. And of course, if you listen to that list, some of those don't have a whole lot of depth to them, but many of them do. So Altman and Taylor use the concepts of breadth, meaning how many subjects people talk about, and depth, meaning the depth of intimacy of the topic. You don't tell your deep, dark secrets to people you don't know well. So you've got to get to the point of knowing them well. All of us know that person who does TMI way too much. That would be somebody who's going over the limits in the depth of sharing. So on the other aspect about depth and breadth are, this, by the way, will be where you'll sometimes go, oh, I could really like this person. We could carry on a conversation. So back to norm of reciprocity, which some of y'all still in your forum posts are not getting, that this is natural, all right, that people react the same way you do. If you say something in one way, they're likely to reciprocate that. And so make sure that you understand that. But self-disclosure is also an area where the norm of reciprocity comes into play. The textbook calls it law of reciprocity. And I mentioned it earlier, but where it really comes up in the materials is in this chapter. But the law of reciprocity is where, if you share something, then I share at the same level. So if it were surface, people are going to share surface things. If there's intimacy, all right, you move to the more intimate things along with that person. Now, part of the problem is that sometimes people move too quickly, all right? So what they do is they have far too much intimate things coming out of their mouth, all right? And you're not ready for that, or you don't want that. You don't want the relationship to develop in that way. So that becomes an area of interest there. Again, the breadth is how many subjects and how many things people, a range of areas in an individual's life where self-disclosure takes place is how the textbook defines it. But it's the number of things people can and will talk about. Don't forget that, once you start going through those layers, you might get in there towards the middle and you go, oops, not interested. And then you depenetrate. All right. So you pull back. So that's a part of this theory also. Another aspect of this theory is social exchange theory. And this is the one that most of y'all will not care a whole lot for. This is the cost benefits analysis. Is what I'm putting into this relationship, am I getting the same back in return? Because go back to that law of reciprocity, that's what you're looking for. If I put this into the relationship, am I getting this back in return? So you talk about rewards minus costs. You talk about the mini-max principle, where people seek to maximize their benefits and minimize their costs, right? And then you also think in terms of when I choose to communicate with somebody, I'm going to choose the thing that brings me the most benefits. Okay. And that's in that relationship. So another aspect of social exchange theory is called the comparison level. And this is where we compare our relationships with other relationships, perhaps ones we've had in the past. Right? It's very normal, even though some of y'all don't like it, but it's normal to compare. Right? And then there's the comparison level for alternatives. All right. And what that says is that, you know, this friend over here, or this romantic interest over here, all right, and it looks like a better deal to me. All right. So I think I'm going to do this. Right. And that changes the relationship development. The ethical reflection on this deals a lot with egotism or egoism, as they call. Should you act selfishly? All right, what's right and good for you? Well, it's your relationship. So, I would argue that that's a decision you have to make. And I don't know whether that would be considered ethical or not. Textbook has a good discussion about the ethics of that. And let me just check something over here. It's an aspect of this theory that's called dialecticalism and dialectics, and what that has to do with is that you want some privacy as well as intimacy in your relationships. And so there are privacy rules, and I'll ask you questions about privacy rules and violating them, and what's it okay, all right? What are the boundaries of privacy in your relationship, and do they coordinate? Those of you that are married, do your boundaries coordinate with each other? Things that we say to one person, what are, let's say there's an intimate secret. Who gets told? All right, no one. And what happens if that gets violated? All right, so it's important to keep in mind about the violation, the violations that happen in the boundaries of your privacy rules. And, and good question there about how there are boundaries and the types of boundaries that exist in relationships. And then boundary turbulence. So how many of you have broken off a relationship with a friend or a significant other because they just couldn't get, the boundaries straight, what's private and what's not private. I remember growing up as a kid, my parents would say, no, don't tell your grandmother this. That would be a boundary. All right. So the critique of this is, the critique of this theory is that there are some people that think it's far too simple. And that could be true. Anyway, Chapter 9 is called the uncertainty reduction theory. Now remember, we're talking about relationship development here. So if you're uncertain about somebody, then you need to reduce that uncertainty. And one of the ways you do is through the previous chapter, social penetration theory. All right, that's not part of theirs, but uncertainty reduction theory is a theory by Chuck Berger. And this focuses on how people get better information about you, how to gain knowledge and create understanding of the other person. And what that does is that helps you increase your predictability with that person. Okay, I can predict that this is what might happen. There are one of the things about our drive, to reduce uncertainty about new acquaintances gets a boost, right, from any of these three prior conditions. In other words, this is what's going to make you do this, all right, reduce uncertainty. Anticipation of a future interaction, you want to talk to that person again. Incentive value, what's the incentive, all right? And that takes us back to the valence, the positive negative that we talked about in the expectancy violations theory. And then deviance, they act in a weird way. All right, so do you want this to continue? And then if you do any of those things, then you go about reducing the uncertainty about the other person. Uh, Keep in mind that this is where attribution theory comes into play. Most of y'all study that in a psychology class. When we see somebody, we draw inferences about what they do. And we do that because we need to be able to predict and explain. And so behavior will come into play there, and then cognition, which does with asks, well, what makes this person this unique person, or this person unique, I guess is probably how I should say that. What makes them a unique individual? Now, the idea of this is to reduce the uncertainty. So uncertainty reduction is simply increased knowledge of what kind of person another is, right? And that provides an improved forecast of how that future interaction is going to take place. So, and how it will turn out. And we're talking here about cognitive brain uncertainty reduction. All right, so that you understand more about that person. There are axioms, AXIOM, about this. And if you'll look in your chapters on page 110 to 112, they'll tell you the 8 axioms of interpersonal communication as they apply to uncertainty reduction. You know, verbal communication, nonverbal communication, with a factor of warmth being there, information seeking, self-disclosure, reciprocity, all these things we've talked about before. And then we throw in similarity and liking, because if you're going to let that relationship develop, right? Because remember, this chapter is in the relationship development area, right? Then, you know, you're going to reduce the uncertainty if those things exist. And then the 8th one is shared networks. You know people that are similar, right? Another thing that comes out of this theory is that they consider it a theorem, right? A theory. Which is a proposition that logically and necessarily follows from 2 axioms. So if it's like friendship and warmth, so nonverbal warmth, plus they know people that I know, so similarities, shared networks, right? Then we go about reducing the uncertainty. So another issue that comes into play here is message plans. Speech teacher here. Message plans. And message plans are how we plan things out. All of y'all have done this. You've seen that odd number, right? Next time, and you do want to reduce uncertainty. You want to get to know them, right? Social penetration, and okay, we're going to reduce uncertainty, right? And then you start planning out the message in your head. Okay, next time I see them, this is how I'm going to approach it. Those of you that are married have done this about your spouse. How am I going to approach this topic with my spouse? Message plans, all right? And they are cognitive, all right? And there's some good examples of hierarchical plans, which means that somebody's in charge, and you know, y'all do it at work too. So there are all kinds of places that we use message plans. So there are some strategies to reducing uncertainty. You seek information. You can do it passively. You can do it actively. You can do it by asking questions, called the interactive strategy with the person. And extractive strategy is not really face-to-face. That's where you get some other ideas from. Maybe things other people say about the person, or maybe you know them online, their online presence. Searching the internet about the person, and that's a new approach, more a new approach to reducing uncertainty. Another strategy to reduce uncertainty is to choose a plan, because a plan's complexity. You know, how detailed is it, and how many contingency plans do you have when you're going to get to know this person. And then hedging is another approach, another strategy. You know, you use ambiguity and humor. You know, you do this but usually to save face. All right, when you're trying to get to know the person, maybe you say something that they find a little offensive. It's like, oh, just kidding. Of course, we always know that there's always a bit of truth when you say just kidding. Um, and then a hierarchy hypothesis, so that when you're trying to do this about somebody, when there's a hierarchy, somebody is in control over you or you are in control over someone. A few of y'all have mentioned that you are the boss at your job. So, in that situation, what happens there when you're trying to reduce uncertainty? Excuse me. A little drink to get the throat done. Sorry. There's a relationship turbulence model that uncertainty can wreak havoc in relationships. And relational uncertainty, relationships can change, people can change. All right, so you get some uncertainty once you've already established the relationship with somebody. Partner interference, they talk about when a relational partner hinders goals, plans, and activities of the other partner. Those are things that will cause turbulence, which when you get to turbulence, you either need to fix it or you exit that relationship. Some of y'all have been in that situation. The critique of this chapter is just that it's a pretty straightforward theory, but it's a little complex, with those axioms leading into theorems and that sort of thing. But there are questions about whether or not Berger's reliance on the concept of uncertainty and that everybody's motivated to reduce it is questionable. So that's their critique of it. And it's a good theory when you talk, when you think about it. We all do that. When you want to get to know someone, you do try to reduce the uncertainty. And then the last chapter, another simple one, is called Social Information Processing, or SIP, S-I-P theory, by Joe Walther. It's simply about computer-mediated communication, which we call CMC. Very commonly studied in our field, especially in the last 20 years. Right, so CMC is important. So we're talking about text-based messages, which filter out many of the nonverbal cues. We've gotten a little bit past that because there's so much now that we do in our computer-mediated communication that sends the message of this is what I'm feeling. Facebook has done that little thing that what are you feeling, and then you put a little emoji type thing, and it's like, okay, so now you know. All right, so these days Walther, this is years ago, before you got to things such as 2003, back in 2005, in that area. Things have changed quite a bit since then. So inherent differences between CMC and face-to-face is the actual presence of the person, called social presence. Media richness theory, how rich is the media? When you text someone, it's different than when you post on Instagram or their social media. All right. And then any lack of social context cues. You're not quite sure what's going on. All right. And so those are some of the differences between face-to-face and CMC. The biggest issue that you would think about, and most of y'all work ways to overcome this, right? And that's that the cues are filtered out in CMC, some of the nonverbal cues especially. And that can cause a flaw in the communication. So what's the difference between CMC? And I'm going to ask you some forum questions and test questions about that. So if you recall, social penetration and uncertainty reduction theories are taking you into the area of, well, this is where we're going to build the relationship. This is how we're going to build the relationship. And so what you get, though, is that there have been studies done that say it's not as bad as we have a tendency to say it is. All right. You can build a relationship over the internet. Most of y'all know that. Some of y'all, you may have met your significant other over the internet. That's very common these days. So the richness of that media has changed somewhat since they came up with this theory. So, you're going to look at the chain on page 123 about how we send social information uh, to somebody, then we form an impression about them, and then the relationship develops out of that. So, and probably most of y'all, if you haven't, someone who's met somebody online. So, there are three features of CMC that provide a rationale for social information processing. That's the verbal cues, okay? Extended times, all right? That means that how long does it take them to answer you? Does that mean something? All right? Is there a message in that? And then there are two, not three, sorry. I can't count. I type three, but I see two, and then I look over here, it's two. All right, so the two things that where nonverbal cues are filtered out that are affected, there are the verbal cues. You can create an impression about people by their language choices and words they choose and their grammar, okay? And then extended time. CMC is slower, all right, and that goes without saying. Other aspects of this theory: verbal cues of affinity replace the nonverbal cues, so I say it, or I use an emoji, or I draw a picture, or I attach a meme or a GIF, or did you say GIF or GIF? I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, that's how you get that out there, because you let people know, that you like them. Affinity deals with that you like them. All right, there's all kinds of things you can do. And then the extended time you can use. For example, I was talking about this with another professor the other day, and he said a student send him an email that said this, and get back to me ASAP. You don't ever say that to someone who's in a position over you. That's not your position to say that. They could the professor could ask a student to do that, but not vice versa. Go back to the earlier chapter on the hierarchical model. You don't tell somebody to get back to you ASAP. It's I have a colleague that does that all the time, and I said, stop saying that to me, because I won't get back to you, because I find that offensive. All right. So you need to know that about me. And then, but you wouldn't know that unless I tell you, which covers all this material here. I've told you this is this. Now you know this about me, so don't do that again. If you don't, then you get into that turbulence area that we just talked about in the earlier chapter. Extended time also deals with that we use many modes. That textbook calls it multimodal. We use many modes to communicate through the CMC, different types. And as I said, we use different instruments. We use tablets, computers, phones, but we also use many different things, such as email, so any social media that you use. Yeah, I'm just looking to see that, hyper-personal perspective deals with the fact that some people think that because you're on the internet and nobody can come looking for you in person, or they can when they find out where you are, that CMC can develop more intimate relationships. And there have been studies that show that oftentimes that CMC has developed much stronger relationships than face-to-face meeting of people. So they take you back here, by the way, when they discuss that about the hyperpersonal, back into the communication model about the sender and the receiver, and the channel that you're using, and the feedback, and talk a little bit about self-fulfilling prophecy there, about how, if you think you're going to fail at something, you will fail. If you think you're going to win or not fail, then you won't, because you'll do things that cause you to do whatever your self-fulfilling prophecy was. Talk about the sender and what they do and what the receiver does. And then remember that the channel is asynchronous, which means that when you send that message, if I send a message on Facebook to someone, they're not going to answer it immediately, right? They're just not. So, but when they do, it's kind of fun, but they're not. And then there's the aspect of the warranting value, that's just giving that, do I have reason to believe that this is true, that this is accurate, what you're telling me? All right. Info sent through your email has low warranting value because it can be manipulated with ease by you or others. But the whole idea of warranting is just that idea of, does this warrant my belief in what you're saying? Okay. The critique of this is that Griffin et al. Thinks that it's technological determinism, saying that how we communicate with people, for example, over CMC, is determined by that media that we use. So anyway, those are the 3 chapters for this week. There are 3 that I really like. There are 3 that to me are easier. We're going to talk about some coming up the next week or so that are not as easy. So again, test goes up on Thursday at noon. It will be due Sunday at 5 p.m. and you cannot post it online after 5 p.m. And so if you're going to be late with it, you can't just send it to me and say, "Hi, Dr. Moore, here it is." Go back to the syllabus. You let me know, all right, what the reason is why it's late, and then I'll make a decision whether I accept it late or not. You don't just send it late. And that's why I close off the portal to posting anything to it. So I hope you all have a great week. Don't stress too much about this test. The questions are very similar to what I'm asking in the forum posts, and y'all are doing great with those. Those of you that are posting, some of y'all are still missing a little on the posting. So, all right, have a great week. Bye.